What is up, everybody? Nate Joma here with the Space Coast Real Estate Spotlight. Today, we are talking to Bryan Seifert with BS Appraisals, and he is going to be covering all things appraisals. Hang out. We will be right back. All right, Bryan, thanks for coming on today.
Hey, man.
So
thanks for the invite. I love the intro, by the way. That's an awesome intro.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great intro, right? My friends at Fiverr helped me with that. They're great people. If anybody like that, I can introduce you to my girl over there that works on all my digital stuff for me. So I want to jump right into it. What's that?
I said it got me pumped, man. I was ready to talk some real estate now.
Love it. All right. So BS Appraisals. Tell me what you do. Tell us what a real estate appraiser does. What do you do?
An appraiser has the unbiased, independent valuation of a property. So the bank buyer and sellers have valuations where they come up and say, I want to sell it for this, and the buyer wants to buy it for this, which usually is not the same. So the buyer wants to sell, the seller wants to sell high and the buyer wants to buy low. Well, when they come to an agreement, win a contract, and then the contract's written out, then they hire, a lot of times when it comes to financing, they need to hire an appraiser come in there. The bank wants to know what's the true value that compared to comparables in the market. So if they get the value of, to see the contract as an appraiser, I look at the contract pretty much at the end of my valuation. So I want to see value of the property, then go, what am I looking at? And if I'm off drastically, that's when I usually call the realtors just to say, hey, if you had a CMA or anything along those lines, send me a copy of it just so I understand what you're looking at compared to what I'm seeing. Because, no one's perfect. And I'm first to admit that, if you think you're the best, you're not the best. So a lot of times, it's better to find out what they're thinking and do it that way than it is to just say, the hell with you guys. This is my value. Pound sand.
Right, exactly. So when you're doing real estate appraisals, you work for the lenders or you work for the real estate agents, you work for the buyer. Who is it that actually employs you?
Well, it all depends on what the purpose of the appraisal is for. So if it's financing, a lot of times the bank will hire me. But again, I'm not working for the bank. I'm an independent contractor. But also my valuation has nothing to do with them. I don't care about the bank, and I don't care about, the buyer and seller or anything like that, because they want my unbiased opinion of the value. So now the only time I care about it is when it's drastically different from what they're actually under contract for. So I want to make sure that, that's when I would call the realtors and say, hey, what's going on with this? But at the end of the day, it's whoever hired me to do it. It would be like the bank. And when it comes down to the purpose of the appraisal. So if it's for divorce, it's usually the attorney. If it's for date of death, again, for attorney. Or if someone just wants the valuation of the property, it could be anybody. But again, that appraisal would not be utilized for anything other than that purpose. So if you hired me, Nate, to appraise your house, I could go appraise it and say, what's the market valuation of the house? Go and appraise your house and hand you an appraisal. But that appraisal is only good piece of paper for you. Right. No bank was going to take that and say, oh, here's the value of this. The bank would like the appraisal in their name. But a lot of times, construction, for new construction, for insurance purposes, they want to know what the value of the property is before, so there's many purposes for an appraisal, and who hires me, it runs the gambit. I do a lot of pre-listing appraisals for realtors in this market. Just a lot of times if they have an oddball house where it doesn't make sense, where there's no sales, it's usually very large homes or unique homes like direct oceanfront penthouse. because there's only a certain amount of penthouses in Brevard County. And so, as an appraiser, I usually go for the white elephant in the world, not the cookie cutter house.
Sure.
I mean, that's why I hang my cap on, is with those tough ones, because I enjoy those. I like the challenge.
Yeah, that makes sense. So is there any wiggle room in looking at appraisals? Like I want to understand, you're saying it's an unbiased opinion, which is great because that's what it needs to be. But if you flex, are you able to change the price of a home? Or I mean, you're just looking at data, it's just a mathematical thing. How does that work?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because that was the hardest thing for me to figure out when I was becoming an appraiser. When I was sitting in the classroom, I had the instructor. He handed out, said, "Okay, here is the subject, a sheet of paper," and then gave you a stack of compare or sales. And said, and gave the same stack, same subject to everyone in the classroom, and said, "Okay, now I want you all to value it." And class will say what the value is. And in a class, it was like 195, 200, 210, 185 throughout the whole place. And I raised my hand at the end, and I was like, "Well, who's right?" And he goes, "Well, you're all right, because it's your opinion of value."
Sure.
But they should be within about 10%. Value wise, all us appraisers looking at the same sort of data should all be within about 10%. The outliers are the ones that get well beyond the 10% valuations. Those are the ones that usually get flagged because there's something not going on right with that. So when they get flagged, they get called in front of the board, and then they tear it apart.
Yeah, you don't want to get there, right?
No. And 20 years being an appraiser in Brevard County, I mean, I've never been that way. So, I mean, I've killed some deals and I've made deals work. But when it comes to wiggle room, it's really hard to say if there's wiggle room. I mean, because when you look at the appraisal, there's usually three sales. Well, it should be three sales. But the valuations after adjustments will come down, let's say 210, 225, 215. So, and the contracts for 220. Well, it's within my range of adjusted for those three. So I can definitely be 220. But sure. Now, if my adjusted range was below the contract for 220, and let's say 118, 115, and 108 were my three sales. Well, I can't get to 220 no matter what I tried, because my adjusted values are there. So yes, I could be at the upper end of that range, be closer to 220, and I could also be in the middle, and I could also be at the bottom. That's where the appraiser's expertise comes in, from their opinion of where it should be within that range.
Makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah,
I mean, so that's one of the things
that's the only leeway we have when it comes to, because we are data driven, and that when it comes down to our opinion just comes down to that aspect of it. So sure. It's not like, and an appraiser, we don't make up adjustments. Well, you shouldn't. When I worked for a national company for 7 years, I reviewed other appraisers' work, and if I, like, how did you call up the appraiser? I'm like, "Hey man, how did you come up with this adjustment?" And usually they're supposed to have a work file that shows them, paired sales analysis or whatever it is, saying this is what this market says for a bathroom. And, but this person said he had written up in the addendum, it was GFA. And I'm like, "What is GFA?" And I asked a couple of colleagues, "What is GFA?" He says, "This guy's made adjustments based on GFA." And no one knew. So I bit the bullet, called the appraiser up. And I'm like, "Hey man, what's going on?" And he's like, "What is GFA? I can't figure that out. And I don't know what this acronym means." He goes, "Oh, it's grab from error." I was like, "Oh, you grab from error adjustment?" And he's like, "Yeah, grab from error." It means he didn't have any data for it. But he figured it was worth something. So he just grabbed an adjustment and put it in there. And I told him, I said, you can't do that. Anyway, you could do it, but you don't want to be called that have this appraisal be sent to the board, because the board's going to go, how'd you come up with this adjustment? And said, I just pulled it out of my butt. I mean, it's not going to be the best thing in the world.
Yeah,
for
sure.
For that appraiser.
For sure.
And
In
a
my
lot of
business
times,
as a mortgage broker, it's difficult for us sometimes when we get low appraisals. And I know that it's not something that you guys, get, shits and giggles from. Like, it just, you're doing your job.
yeah.
You're finding reasons to value something either higher or lower based on what your findings are. So I mean, I get that.
Well, it's like the bell curve. You know what a bell curve is? It starts off with a value. Well, kind of, I say it's like a bell curve, but the market data, when the market was going through the roof in 2007, 2008, and then it crashed right back down. Well, at that time, the values were increasing so much that the data from all the prior sales was not helping it out in any way. So you could be under contract for 210, and yesterday sold identical property sold for 200, and then 2 days prior to that sold for 190, and 2 days prior to that 185. And well, how are you at 210? I have 200, and these are 3 sales. They all closed yesterday next door. I mean, how are you 210? And
Right.
so we were always coming in low. And because the appraisers, we work on data. We don't make up the data. We can't predict in the future what's going to happen. We can't, we only see what happens yesterday and use that data for today's valuations. And so everyone was getting upset with the appraiser because your values here, and even our appraised values are slightly below it. And, because that's our data. But then when the market crashed, you're trying to short sell it for 180, and all my sales are 210, 215, 205, and you're trying to sell for 200. Well, now we're too high when I was trying to get rid of it then. So then you were upset at us again. It was like, well, I can't make data, and this is my data. This is what I'm utilizing for my appraisal. I can't make this up.
Right.
But that's when I guess you could say the time adjustment came into effect, which is, it's a good adjustment. It's something that happened at that time, but that's what happens. You have to utilize something to make sense of the data that you're seeing. And the one variable that was happening that we couldn't see was time. So then once we figured out how to do a time adjustment, because I literally did one, it was new construction where it was in Palm Bay. It was started out on a contract for it was like 180, and it closed it switched hands 5 times before the house was actually had got CO to be lived in. So in 9 months, they sold that contract for that house 5 different times, and each time it went up 30 grand. So by the time I got at the end, I'm like, what's going on here? Because this is just ridiculous. It was like 320, 290, 280, or whatever, 260, all the way down. It's like, I was like, this is not making sense, but that was the data. And that helped me prove time, because there was the same thing. Nothing changed on it. And it just showed me that this is and that's why I used my calculations for a time adjustment as my paired sales. And
that makes sense
for those things.
Yeah. That's crazy. So what happens when you submit an appraisal to a lender? We're looking at a purchase, and the appraisal comes in low, whether it's $1,000, $5,000, whatever the case might be. What actions can be taken by the lender, by the real estate agents, by the buyer, if they feel strongly in the purchase price versus the appraisal that came in a little bit low? Like, what happens? And are there any options, or is there any recourse, if you will?
Yeah. I mean, you can do a reconsideration of value.
Okay.
And basically what that means is that you would have to find sales that would be considered comparable to the subject, and you send it to the appraiser. Or you can go back at them and say, hey, show me your paired sales analysis for the lack of waterfront adjustment. Because my parents, they live in Suntree, and they live on a lake, I mean, but it's man-made lake, but it's like a 30-foot deep lake. It's a big lake. And a guy from an appraiser came from Orlando, appraised my parents' house, and called it, there was no value for a retention pond. I'm like, that's not a retention pond. There's a difference between a retention pond and a lake. Retention ponds dry up, and this was permanent. It's always got water in it. And but I mean, I told my dad, it's like, you can go back and show data. I mean, you can say, hey, here's waterfront properties compared to non-waterfront properties within my subdivision. I don't understand why he's not doing that. And you basically can throw doubt into the appraisal. And I don't know if a mortgage broker would say, hey, let's just order another appraisal from a different appraiser. Because, if you bring up enough facts that don't make sense about the appraisal, then you could do, say, I want a new appraiser. And that's usually why I always reference saying, try to get a local appraiser. Because I've been here 20 years and I know everything around here. I know what consists of value and what doesn't consist of value. But, as a Florida appraiser, I can appraise Pensacola if I wanted to, but I'm not going to be very good in Pensacola right now. I mean, I'd have to go and get myself competent over there, but there's just to drive over there and appraise it. I will miss things because I haven't lived there. But you can do a reconsideration of value, and that's when you bring a couple sales and you provide it to the appraiser for reconsideration. That's for a lot of times why I hope that the realtor will actually do their CMA before they value it, because then you can utilize those or newer ones to valuation. But I mean, but the comparables should be not comparables of value, but comparables of, when I say value, if you're under contract for 300, don't send me comparables that are 300. Because if your house is 2,000 square feet, I don't want to see a 3,000 square foot house.
Right.
It's not comparable, and it's comparable in price that you're looking for. But otherwise than that, I mean, a person looking at a 2,000 square foot house is not going to look at a 3,000 square foot house. I mean, they would, but they're different animals.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So one of the things that you mentioned a second ago that I think is huge is working with local appraisers versus having real estate appraisers that come from out of area. Like in the example that you used with your father's place, you said an Orlando appraiser had come over to the Space Coast. Well, those are two completely different markets.
Yeah.
And he made some errors that a local, Brevard County Space Coast real estate appraiser wouldn't have made. So this goes out to all of the buyers, sellers, real estate agents that are going to listen to this. You want to make sure that when you're working with a buyer, a seller, a bank, a mortgage lender, a mortgage broker, that they are local, obviously, but you want to make sure that they're using appraisers that are local as well, because it's really going to be a literal make or break situation in if you're going to make your value or if you're going to fall short.
Yeah. Well, even if it does still fall short, at least you have someone that has knowledge of that market area. And then you can basically say, hey, we tried or whatever, maybe we need to renegotiate the valuation of this, the contract.
Yeah, exactly.
I've heard multiple things where realtors are writing in the contract saying that they require a local appraiser. I don't know how much weight that holds, because the AMCs from a lot of these mortgage brokers, if they go from a national mortgage broker, not a local one, they usually hire these companies that bid out, the appraiser. So, and a lot of times the ones that bid the lowest will get it, and they're the ones in Orlando because they don't mind driving, because they're going to hit up 16 other homes or 3 other homes in here and drive right back and write it up. They don't care. And they're the type that they'll give you a value and say, pound sand, I don't care, this is my value. The reconsideration value, just whatever. To give you an example, I did a townhouse in Titusville not too long ago. It was a 4-plex townhouse, and I valued it. and I sent it through, and it was below market. You know, I'm like, they're like, why didn't you use the sale within that complex? I'm like, what sale? Oh, the MLS wasn't there. Search online, Zillow or whatever, just said the address and went through Redfin, all those things, trying to see if they're sold. It wasn't there. Public records didn't have anything records of it. And the guy goes, oh yeah, it's this one. And I was like, okay, how did it sell? And he goes, I don't know how it sold, but it sold. I was like, all right, well, I went and found that address, found the owner's name, went to the deeds and searched that owner's name, and that house, that unit sold. The warranty deed was filed, but it wasn't reflective on any site. So, and when I saw what it sold for, I calculated it out, it was enough to support the valuation of that my value. So that was a reconsideration of value that actually worked. I actually applied that new sale to number one because it sold next door, and my valuation changed, and it said my data changed because I have a new sale that wasn't readily available. And because I searched MLS, public records, online, everything, just because I don't want to see if I missed something. And that wasn't available on any of those, but the guy still was adamant that it sold. So he told me what unit was, same exact unit as mine. And I went and found the tax card, went and looked at the public records for that owner, found its deed. It sold literally 3 days prior to me going out inspecting the property, so I could utilize it.
That's crazy. That's cool how that worked out, though. So
yeah,
does that happen often where there's going to be a sale and then maybe nobody's able to find it?
Well, I mean, because it's called, a lot of public records work in the rears, which is they're usually about a month to 3 months out. So if your house sells, I mean, that's why I tell, if your house sells on public records and you close on it, it doesn't get recorded online for about 2 to 3 months. So, and the appraisers, we utilize MLS. So that's why I always try to instill to realtors that when they're closing, they sell a property, don't let it sit for 3 days, which is I think their max. They're allowed to have a house sit on MLS before they have to update it if it's sold or whatever happened to it. Don't let it sit for 3 days. I mean, if it close it on MLS so the appraiser can utilize that as a comparable information. Because then, once it's on MLS, then we can go find that warranty deed, because the warranty deed's actually readily available.
Right.
But if you bring up the plat of a subdivision and you click on sales like 2023, 2022, well, 2023 is not going to have that sale on there, if it's sold within a month. You have to wait a couple months or that show up. Then that one closed.
Makes sense. I feel like there's so much that we could talk about with real estate appraisals.
Yeah.
And I mean, I want to make sure I keep this short enough that people can listen to it when they're driving to work, driving home from work. So, in closing, Bryan, I definitely want to have you back on for sure. I want to have you back on. We're going to cover all of it. But in closing, what do you think, if I'm going to list my house, if I'm going to be, a seller, what do you think is my first step, aside from obviously recruiting a real estate agent to help me with the CMA? But do you, I guess what I'm saying in a different way is, as a seller, is it always beneficial for me to try to get an independent appraisal as well? Or should I just rely on what the mortgage company is going to say?
If you have a unique property, waterfront, anything along those lines, I would infer you get find a local realtor, have them do a CMA. CMAs are free. Especially if you're trying to sell it. And the only thing you have to do is infer to them, get a good one, get a good realtor that's been in the market for a while, that know the market, that will give you CMA. Now, if you want a definitive appraiser that has years of experience and knowledge and all, everything I can say, you would hire an appraiser. I did one for a realtor where they had a house that they thought was like 1.1 million. And she was like, I'm not seeing it, but she didn't want to just burst her bubble and say, no, I can, and lose that listing. So she said, I will pay for an independent appraiser to come out to value it. And I valued it at 950,000. And so those sellers came right down. Okay, we know exactly it's 950. So let's do 965, 970. And if someone comes all cash, no appraisal, then we'll just make it 20,000 over what we think it's worth. But also, I'm sorry, I was going a little far. She called me and told me she found that it cut out the not sincere buyers. They had someone come out to her house, out to the house, and say, "Okay, we'd love this, but it's not going to appraise. We think it's about 850." She goes, "No, it's going to appraise. I have an appraisal right here." And they said, "Well, my buyers don't want to pay that." When right then she knew, I'm not going to deal with you. I'm not going to put my time into you. I'm not going to write up contract and the appraisal contingency and have all that song and whatever dance that was going through. She knew that person was going to lowball them and got rid of them. Literally, they closed it for like 960, which is more than my appraisal, but that's fine. I mean, I had no problem with that. But she was just that helped out because it cut out all the I wouldn't say riffraff, but the lowball offers.
Right.
And it made them go and also helped her say, when the seller's just thinking of 1.1 and her saying 920,000, it made it a lot easier for them to go, okay, now we have an appraisal that definitively shows us 950. So if anything worse comes worse, we're not going to go through below 950.
Right.
There's no negotiation. We know what the value of the property is. We know that if we're at 975 and they want to negotiate, the lowest we're going to go is 950 because we know that's the value of it. Anything above it, great, more power for them, and that's pretty much how it worked out.
That's awesome. All right, that's a great story on that. And so, somebody that has a unique property that's not one of these cookie cutter type properties really ought to, and they're going to do themselves a disservice possibly if they don't try to get an independent appraisal as well, not to rely on what the bank has to say.
Oh yeah, I mean Zillow, and a lot of these banks utilize a software program that just takes averages from the area, and they apply it for the GLA, square footage of the house, for the sales in that market area or whatever it is. And how, I don't know how their models work, but a lot of times if you bring Zillow for an oceanfront or direct waterfront or just unique house in general, it's not going to be able to take into account all the different variables in there. But a cookie cutter house, Zillow is perfectly fine. But if you're in those houses, you can hire a local realtor because a local realtor would love to sell your house and just ask, get a good CMA on it. And then you'll have an idea what that's worth. But if you need an appraisal, you need a definitive value, you need it for insurance, reproduction costs, or divorce or whatever it is, hire an appraiser because that's what we're here for.
That's awesome. All right. So I ask all of my guests, Bryan, a closing question. And that question I'm going to ask you, it's the same one. What is one thing, if you had to just pick one thing that you love about either living or working here on the Space Coast, what is that one thing for you?
This is easy for me. I moved from Philadelphia down to here, and Philadelphia, I mean, beautiful city. I wouldn't say outside of Philly, but moved to here and just driving around, going over a causeway or the rivers underneath, be able to see manatee, dolphins, or whatever it is, palm trees, all that is just wonderful to me.
That's awesome. So if somebody wanted to reach out to you to get an independent appraisal or learn a little bit more about what you do, What's the best way for them to be able to get in touch with you?
The best way would probably be via email. Bryan, Bryan, at bsappraisals.com.
Bryan at bsappraisals.com. And I'll make sure I put that in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks, Bryan. I do appreciate you coming on, and we definitely need to get you back on because I feel like I said there's so many things that we could talk about. Real estate appraisals are something that a lot of people don't really understand fully, and I want everybody to have the opportunity to
Definitely
hear what you have to say and ask some questions.
And also, I would say they can actually ask questions in the comment section, and that'll be for the next time.
There you go. That's perfect. All right, Bryan. Well, take care, my friend. I'm so glad that you were able to stop by. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks very much, man. Been a pleasure hanging out with you. See you, man.
Yes, sir.